Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, it is Thursday, March the 6th, and we are recording in San Francisco, which, according to my guest, Kevin Fagan, the author of a major new book, The Lost and Found, is homeless central in the United States. Kevin, congratulations on the new book. Why is San Francisco homeless central? And that's the core theme and the subject of your new book.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it's considered homeless central because homelessness for many years, for decades, has been probably the most visible manifestation in America in a city, because the main homeless population is located right downtown where the tourist areas are and the soup kitchens. Everything kind of jumbles in next to each other. So it doesn't have what you can quantifiably say the worst homeless problem in America. It's just where when you come from out of town, you see it more readily. And the book that I've written is The Lost and the Found, and it traces two people that I got to know over the last 20 odd years who I helped get off the streets through my reporting. I wrote about them, and their families saw the stories, came out, and essentially rescued them. And I helped in the process in various ways, and it was a joyful experience helping two people get off the streets.
Yeah, and the two characters in the book, both memorable characters. Unfortunately, neither of them are around any longer, Tyson and Rita. But before we get there, Kevin, how is it, and I know this is a dumb question.
There are no dumb questions.
But you get asked it all the time. How is it possible that San Francisco, one of the richest, the wealthiest, the most advanced places in the world, outside where we're recording, the streets are full of self-driving cars, the city is full of some of the most advanced tech companies in the world. How is it that San Francisco simultaneously is considered homeless central? As you said, doesn't maybe have the worst homelessness in America, but it's up there. It's one of the leading homeless centers in the United States and indeed in the world.
Yeah, it gets demonized, especially by conservatives who don't like the liberal bent of the city for one. But
San Francisco, someone wrote a book about.
That's true. Yeah, it's got good weather. It's a compassionate city. Some areas will chase you to the edge of town when night falls, and some areas are more prone to jail you if you're on the street. San Francisco has been leaning into being tougher on homelessness in the last few years, but historically, it's been a place where you can come and the weather is decent and the enforcement was kind compared to other places. Now, that having been said, only about 70%, only about 30% of the people who are homeless in San Francisco came from outside. 70% were actually living under a roof somewhere here when they became homeless. So there's a bit of a myth that it's some giant magnet for people to come to. People come here housed and unhoused, but mostly housed for the same reasons all of us housed people come to. It's got a great reputation as a place of kindness and opportunity. So if you're poor somewhere else, you come here, you think, okay, I can make my way. Things don't work out because we have a huge split between rich and poor here. just as in America, the worst we've had since the robber baron era of the late 1800s. And things don't work out. A couple of rattles down the ladder of your life through family, friends, services, government, and boom, you're on the bottom.
What about local government? As you say, it's become the pin-up for conservatives about how progressive government doesn't work. Your book is mostly about Rita and Tyson, these two characters who are homeless. It's a heartrending story. But you do touch on policy. You bring up Gavin Newsom, who's been on the show a couple of times before. How much of the crisis of homelessness, in your view, Kevin, is bound up with the failure of local government? You note in the book, I think, that the city has a budget of $600 million, which is larger than some states.
Pretty small state. But yeah, it spends a lot of money, and it spent more money recently. These things take a long time to manifest. It'll take you 2 years of engagement with a street outreach worker to persuade your average very hardcore chronically homeless person to come inside. It's a slow process, and people want answers like that. The city spends a lot of money on supportive housing. It probably spends as much, if not more, than anything else on maintaining formerly homeless people in housing, which is where a lot of that $600 million goes. And that's a difficult issue. You know, there's a housing first aspect to what we do here, and that's bring people inside first, put them under a roof, and then you can deal with the issues that put them on the street: drug addiction, mental illness, disability of some kind, just trauma from being on the street or heading into the street. I mean, there's a range of issues that put people into chronic homelessness, which is where you've been on the street a year or more. And again, actually, only about 30% of the homeless population is chronically homeless. Those are the folks you see on the street in tents, shooting up, snorting up, acting out in public, essentially. The other 70% are in shelters or couch surfing or in some of the better vehicles in parts of town. It's really this cohort of the most troubled people that need the most help. And if we didn't spend the kind of money we do on the programs we do, you wouldn't be seeing 8,000 or so people on the street every night, which is the one night count. You'd be seeing thousands more. It's a thing. It's a thing of government and nonprofits that getting everything coordinated and getting the programs working perfectly, that's just is a monumental task anywhere. And I've seen it all over the country. As I've done the homeless beat at the Chronicle as a concentration of mine for 30 years. And I've been all over New York, Denver, you name it. And everyone has trouble. There are very few cities that have really figured out a system that has eliminated or come close to eliminating the chronic homeless spectacle in their streets, because it's a spectacle that bothers people. Residents and businesses, they don't want homeless people on their doorsteps doing their thing, pitching tents. And homeless people, they don't want to be homeless. That's one of the core truths that has come to me over all these years. Homeless people don't want to be sleeping in the sidewalk. They want to have a place to live. But you get stuck in your survival mode and taking an offer from someone who's usually a stranger who says, leave all your stuff out here or bring some of it with you and we'll give you a shelter bed, we'll try to put you into housing, or we'll put you into a whole range of places that people can go to. And there's a lot of fear of homeless people for trusting that. And so they say, okay, screw it, I'm going to stay right where I'm at, because I know my routine. I know where I can sleep, where my face isn't going to get kicked in. I know where I can get my food every day. I know where I can, and if I'm addicted, which most of the hardcore chronically homeless people are to something. I know where to get that. You put me in a shelter, you put me in some housing place somewhere, it disrupts my whole routine. And what am I going to do? Where am I going to go get my stuff? Where am I going to get my needs met? It's difficult. It's very difficult.
Kevin, a couple of years ago, we had another Kevin on the show, Kevin Adler, who I know you know.
Yes.
Who's
he's
also
a
homeless activist or advocate in San Francisco.
Yep.
And he wrote a book which suggested that we should all hug or at least look a homeless person in the eye every day to humanize them. That's what you did. The narrative of Lost and Found makes you one of the really, I guess, central three characters. We'll talk about the two homeless characters, but you also place yourself, not in a narcissistic way, but you begin the book about yourself, and you went out and, if not became homeless yourself, lived like a homeless person. Is that fair for the book?
Hey, pretty much. I spent a lot of my time for 6 months in the street in 2003, and then I've spent a lot of time since then, sometimes sleeping outside, sometimes just staying up all night. I like to immerse in the scene, and what I did in 2003 was photographer Brant Ward and I immersed in the scene, and we went home a lot, most of the time, but we'd stay out all night. You want to see the whole life cycle of the people you're writing about, because you get a different conversation at 4 a.m. than you do at noon. And I made myself a character because over all those decades of covering homelessness, it became part of me. And when I was a young man, this was not a strange world to me. I was tossed out of my house when I was 16, lived on my own in an unfinished garage. Put myself through school, built my own furniture, slept in my car at times, essentially, clawed my way up through college, and then I was a traveling street singer in Europe, New Zealand and Australia, where I'd hitchhike from town to town, sleeping in doorways or alleys or side of the road, and sometimes, finding a place to live. I didn't mind sleeping outside. It was interesting to me because, for one, I knew I was going to go back to the career that I'd just gotten a degree to do, which is journalism. It's all I've wanted to do since I was 14. But it gave me familiarity with the street, and the streets never scared me. Homeless people don't scare me. It's thieves and angry drug dealers. That's one thing you got to watch for in the street. So you don't mess with. You learn who not to mess with. But your average homeless person, I love talking to homeless people. And Kevin Adler is dead right. One of the greatest things you can do to help alleviate homelessness is stop and talk to people. Make them be seen. Help them give them some dignified time, which isn't that hard to do. I mean, if you're passing by people in the street and someone is having an episode, screaming at a wall, or dope sick and fidgety, you're not going to have a good conversation because you're talking to the drugs or the mental illness at that moment. But most homeless people, everyone likes to talk. Most people like to talk, and most people like to talk about themselves, especially when you've been through trauma the way homeless people have been. And hear them, make them feel like someone gives a damn for a minute. Because so many people just walk on by and they either feel sad.
I think wasn't that the title of Kevin's book, Walk On By? Something like that.
Something like that. It was
and Kevin...
It's a nice book. Yeah, you either walk by or they're mad.
Yeah, Kevin talks about sort of experiencing the humanizing of homeless people because his uncle was homeless. My sense with you, Kevin, second Kevin, is that in a sense, homeless people are humanized for you because you acknowledge in the beginning, in your biographical introduction to the book, that it could have been you.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, you were thrown out of your home. You note that you didn't have the best of relations with your parents, although now or afterwards you did.
Yeah, we patched it up.
You note that you didn't take drugs. What's the parable of your life, or is that the wrong way of thinking about this?
No, I've done a lot of thinking about how I got to where I am and what that involved. It's for many years, until the last few years actually, I didn't talk about how I had experienced homelessness as a kid. I didn't talk about how we grew up poor, because my dad was going to school for most of my formative childhood years. Because you get judged. I felt judged as a kid because I didn't have the cool new clothes, I didn't have new stuff, and then at certain times we had to ration food, and I couldn't have friends over because they'd eat food, and that would piss off my parents. It's one reason I focused on poverty and homelessness as a reporter all these years. I wanted to figure it out. Okay, well, how did I wind up being in the kind of milieu that I was in as a child, and then as a young man, and then making my way through college and into a career that I have loved. It's my parents. We're not good at kids, but they emphasized education and learning. Every wall was lined with books. Dad had been a teacher at points. My mom had been a Navy journalist. They were smart folks, just not good with money, and not particularly great with kids. But they enforced upon me that everyone goes to college. That's what you do. So when I was on my own, I thought, well, I'm not going to pump gas. I do the jobs. The jobs I had going through school until the last couple of years were, cleaning toilets, washing dishes, office temp, everything that could fit into my school schedule, until the final year or so when I became editor of the campus research magazine. That actually paid enough to, have a good place to live, and I could rent a place with roommates. It was great. It was like a new way of being for me, and it was slowly chipping my way up. But for some reason, I smoked pot. I was a college kid, and I drank a few beers now and then. But for some reason, I just wasn't attracted by the hard stuff, by super drinking or heroin, cocaine, the usuals. For me, it got in the way of my studies. I was singularly minded. I was going to get that damn diploma, hell or high water, and even smoking dope at some point. Smoking pot got in the way because I couldn't get the work done in time. So,
Kevin, what would you say to some people listening to this, maybe a conservative who would say, someone not particularly friendly towards government or regulation, would say, well, Kevin could do it. He came from a tough background. His parents didn't treat him particularly generously. He had to leave home when he was 16. He was thrown out, and he's made it. He's a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist. He's got this new amazing book out, The Lost and the Found. So anyone could make it.
Yeah, but it's not easy for everyone. Some people need more help than others. Some people are fine. This is a country where it should be perfectly fine to be punching a cash register somewhere and being able to save enough money to retire well and pay all your bills. It's become harder and harder and harder. And there's a, you can get into a real macro discussion about this, but there's a feeling that you can't get ahead. When you're working, when minimum wage is just a little over $7 an hour in a lot of places. It's higher in some California, some cities have higher ones, but your basic minimum wage is $7 and even $15. It doesn't pay enough to live well, especially in big cities. And people lose hope. They need help. And they need education and supportive people around them. My parents, for all the failings that happened, they were decent people. Not everyone grows up with decent people. They grow up with traumatized. Sometimes they have traumatized people who manifest that into abuse of the kids. Because I think bad behavior comes from some kind of pain inside yourself. And if you've grown up being beaten, thrown, rejected, belittled, without any, much more poverty than I had to experience, you're not just going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It takes extraordinary can-do spirit to do that. And it helps if you have a few key people along the way. I had a psychology teacher in high school who said, think positive thoughts and you'll, move toward positivity, which is simplistic, sure. But when I was 16 and on my own, sleeping in a bed that I made out of scrap wood and ropes, I would spring out of it, look in a mirror and say, I feel great 10 times in a row. And I felt better. I believed in myself. I believed I could do this. I believed I would write in a journal saying, I can make it. I drove myself to get the diploma, to become a working journalist. And I wasn't going to take no. Not everyone has that self-generated character. And I believe we have to be compassionate to that and make opportunities more available for people who don't. Because, like I said, no one wants to be homeless. Everyone wants a roof. Find out what works for people. Are you going to be a CPA? Are you going to be a writer? Are you going to, swing a shovel somewhere? Are you going to punch a register? It's important to honor people for who they want to be as a contributing member of society and make those opportunities available. And one of the most depressing statistics I ran across in my reporting is that about half of all homeless people who are older than 50 years old became homeless after they were 50 because they aged out of their jobs. A lot of laboring jobs, which you hit your 50s and your mid 50s and your back can't stand, stooping for, cleaning stuff, or your back can't stand stocking shelves anymore. You get RSI from laboring jobs, so your hands don't work as well. And for a lot of folks, the rest of their family is low income too. Can't take you in. Once you lose your job or can't work anymore, you can't just go live in the back room of Uncle Joe's bungalow somewhere because they're on rent restrictions for how many people they can have. And a lot of the folks that I talked to when I reported that phenomenon over the years, they have some pride. They don't want to crush in on their family. So they wind up in the street. They wind up in shelters or in the street. And, not all of those folks become chronically homeless, of course.
Kevin, one of the particularly tragic things about your book is that one of the characters, Tyson, was from a loving family.
Yeah.
Grew up in Danville in the East Bay, which is an extremely expensive suburb. He had a loving father, a brother who did everything for him, and yet he still ultimately died of an overdose as a homeless man. So tell me a little bit about Tyson and why he's such a particularly tragic figure in at least my interpretation of Tyson in terms of your narrative.
Yeah, I really liked Tyson. I like his family a lot. He had I think the conclusion I came to and some of the family was he had an undiagnosed bipolar condition. And he was self-medicating for many years for that. That's when you take drugs to try to pound down the depression or whatever's going on in your head. And he did grow up in Danville, which is an upscale place. He had every opportunity in the world. His brother, Barron, became a successful plant manager.
And his father was a CPA.
Yeah, his dad and his mom sold real estate. They got divorced. But a divorced family doesn't guarantee that you're going to crashed to the bottom. No, they had a fine life as kids, and he couldn't focus long enough to hold a job very long, and he was good. He sold cellular phones and managed health clubs, and didn't finish college because he couldn't stick with it. That was the trouble that he couldn't come to grips with, was not being able to stick with anything, and he would compensate first by drinking, then by snorting coke, and cocaine became a big thing for him. And then he was finally living with his grandmother, and the grandmother died, and it was the last free place that he had available, because he'd kind of run afoul of all the other situations he had in his life, and he hit the streets. And then he became addicted to heroin and meth, and eventually fentanyl, and it was terrible. It was terrible, but he still maintained a really great persona in the streets. I mean, some people become very bitter and angry. He was a nice guy. I mean, I met him when I was doing a story on a navigation center shelter along the Embarcadero that was being proposed. He was sitting on a piece of cardboard, and I was fishing for quotes, stopped and talked to him, and one of our photographers, Jessica Christian, great shooter, shot a picture of Tyson. And I could tell, I can pretty much assess what I'm getting into these days when I approach someone on the street. I could see, this guy's got his head clear, whatever drug he's doing. I could see a meth pipe next to him. He's stable right now. So we had a great conversation. He was thoughtful, incisive, and I thought, yeah. So I used him in the story, quoted him, and the photo ran, and his brother Barron in Ohio saw the photo and called me and said, "That's my brother. I haven't seen him in 7 years. Help me find him. I'm coming out there. I'm arranging rehab." So he did. He flew out here and hired an interventionist named Vicky, who was terrific. And the three of us stomped around all day with Nick, the photographer, looking for Tyson, because I knew where the camps were. He wasn't going to be sitting on that piece of cardboard again, where I'd found him before. And we found him that night and did an intervention in a hotel. Vicky and Barron did the intervention, and my participation was taking notes and talking to him. And after all these years, I feel it's important to be a human being in these situations. And I would say, Tyson, this is your chance. Choose life. And he didn't need much persuading. He was ready. He was in his 40s, I believe, right around 40. And he took it and went off and did intervention and wound up in Ohio, living near Barron in a sober house. Not supposed. Usually I try not to give away the end of the book, but you did. That's okay. He failed ultimately in his rehab, and it was a tragedy. And I think the bipolar condition drove that, because he came back and overdosed at the same place we found him at. Now Rita, on the other hand, was a different story.
Before we get to Rita, the subtitle of your book is A True Story of Homelessness, Found Family and Second Chances. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously said, or maybe misstated, that there are no second chances in America. Are there second chances, Kevin, on the street?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, Fitzgerald, I actually love his writing, but he was wrong. There are second chances.
Well, Tyson had more than two chances, 3 or 4, at least in your narrative.
He did, and that's what happens with a lot of chronically homeless people. Is first you encounter some trouble, bad luck, bad choice, bad health, you name it, whatever rocks you, and you turn to family. And family doesn't always last forever in terms of helping get you through to the next stage. Then you turn to some government aid, you turn to friends, maybe, and then you just kind of crash down the ladder of life. And he did have many chances. He even ran into Kevin Adler, at one point, which is a scene in the book.
I missed it. Yeah, I have to reread it. I missed that bit.
He did. He was on the Kevin roams around looking for people who want to reconnect with family or friends, and he found Tyson, put Tyson on the phone with his father. The conversation quickly, Tyson got pissed off. It quickly went bad. Tyson got pissed off at something and stormed off. So it was real brief. Didn't help. Kevin meant well, of course, but these chances came and went for Tyson, and the last big chance he had was his brother flying out, arranging rehab, putting him in rehab, and God, Barron and his family really put their shoulders into it to save Tyson. And Tyson was a smart guy and personable. I just talked to one of his friends yesterday in Danville who said, yeah, he was really popular and quick, smart. He had, if the right kind of treatment had come along at the right time, his life would have taken a different trajectory.
Yeah, and San Francisco, for better or worse, has a kind of hellish quality. But his father wrote him a letter, and if you read it, certainly you published it after his death, asking him or begging him to stay away from San Francisco.
Yeah. You immerse in the street life in San Francisco, and there are certain districts. I once mapped out all the territories of the homeless in San Francisco, and they're pretty specific, just like house people. I mean, you live in the Haight. It's a different kind of neighborhood from living in Pacific Heights or living in the Tenderloin. Anyway, he immersed in the street culture, which perpetuates your drug addiction, perpetuates your doing whatever you got to do to get by. He fished in dumpsters to get stuff to sell. Sometimes he, of course, steals stuff to sell, because you have to feed that drug habit every day when you're addicted, and it's not falling out of the sky. You gotta pay at least $20-$30 a day, sometimes 10 if you're really chipping hard. I mean, you're taking little bits. That money has to come from somewhere. Panhandling, you can barely kind of eke by, I guess, if you do that, but it's a rough place, and you feel trapped in your survival routine. So it's very hard to get out of it.
So tell us about Rita Grant. Her story is slightly less dark than Tyson's. Tell me about her and her story.
Yeah, I had the luxury of, Tyson I met in 2019, and his whole involvement with me when he was alive was for 6 months, because 6 months after I met him, he came back and overdosed at the same corner or the same block. Rita I met in 2003 on Homeless Island, and I knew
You
her.
might know what Homeless Island is.
Yes.
Not everyone, certainly from San Francisco, will be familiar with that.
Yeah, it became kind of famous when I wrote about it in 2003. I got to know Rita. I knew Rita for 20 years. Loved her. She was a great person. And what happened was Homeless Island was a triangle of concrete over the corner of Van Ness and Mission Streets. And it had the advantage of these many lanes of traffic that had to stop at a four-way stop for traffic light. And while they were stopped, you can go out and panhandle it. And there were about a dozen drug-addicted homeless folks living on that triangle of island. It had a couple of trees, and they could put their shopping carts there. This was in 2003 when I spent 6 months in the street reporting for this series that Brant Ward, the photographer, and I did. It was carts and tarps and cardboard. Tents you really didn't see in any
Was
big numbers.
that series called Shame on the City?
It was. It was called Shame of the City, and it was a 5-day series. After those 6 months, we produced this thing. It started, I believe, on a Sunday and went for 5 days. First day was Homeless Island, and then a description of what hardcore, chronically homeless people were, because the term was not widely known at the time. It's much better known now. And at the time, not a lot of people were doing intensive stories on homelessness. There had been compassion fatigue. So when this series hit, it was important because the first day was showing the depth of the problem. Second day was, I believe, a family in a van, living in a van with little kids. And the third day, I think, was me and Brant sleeping in the biggest shelter on the West Coast, which was in San Francisco. And the fourth day was an analysis that I did on how we got here to homelessness. And the fifth day was the most promising practices I saw to get us out. And so a tidy little 5-day package like that, they boxed it up into, or reprinted it into a what we call a pullout. So it's its own section. And they printed up about 50,000 of those things. We gave them all away. Everyone wanted them all over the country. Because George Bush's homeless czar, Philip Mangano, read the series. The president saw the series. They thought it was a really good, I guess, ad mailer for supportive housing. I mean, I wasn't intending to be a marketer, but Mangano essentially used it all over the country to encourage supportive housing, and then he implemented policies as the national homeless czar to enforce supportive housing. So that was gratifying.
So I do want to come back to policy, but let's go back to Rita.
Yeah.
So you met her in 2003, and you knew her for 20 years. What's her story?
She had been what people call a golden girl in high school. She was beautiful. Runner-up to the homecoming queen crown. The family said she was homecoming queen. There's a lot of years since then. But she was just
There's some photos in the book about.
Yeah, she was very
really
beautiful.
was very beautiful.
Yep, and she was a crack gymnast, Olympic bound, until she injured her knee, and a surfer, and a popular kid. Got out of high school and met another surfer guy named Diver Doug, who was really good at diving for fish and pulling up eventually up treasures out of the bottom of the Florida coastline. And they fell in love and became kind of bohemian hippies. This was in the late 60s, early 70s, where they were, wandering around, living on fishing and a kind of a shoreline life, and wound up in Key West, which is this beautiful tourist town at the southernmost tip of America, and living on boats and an island called Christmas Tree Island, just off the coast of Key West, to take a little skiff in and out. And it was kind of a Robinson Crusoe life. It sounded idyllic, and they had 4 kids together, and the kids they remember really good times growing up like that. The boats, some of them were pretty ramshackle, and they'd get another boat when it, became problematic. It sprung a leak, or, they just needed another place. And it was a really healthy life. Rita was into health food. They all swam like fishes. She had 3 daughters and 2 sons, and they all looked like models out of a fashion magazine. I mean, it was a nice life in the southern end of Florida. And then she and Doug split up. She got into drinking. She wound up with a couple of boyfriends who, she had also done a little bit of heroin, but, there are ways to do heroin that aren't full-on drug addict level. And she got deeper into that. Deeper into heroin, deeper into booze. Finally wound up with a boyfriend who came out here. She lost custody of her kids. The kids wound up at foster homes or relatives, and or friends, and she came out here to San Francisco. The boyfriend promptly ditched her. She struggled to try to figure out how to get by, and plummeted to the street. And that's when she met a guy named Tommy, who was the leader of Homeless Island, or he founded Homeless Island, so to speak. He thought it was a great place to panhandle. He took her over there. The 2 of them staying on that island pretty much started to attract more people, until eventually they had a dozen there, and others would come in and out. It became a real place, a real nexus point for a lot of homeless folks. And when Brant and I were doing our 6 months outside, early on, we stumbled across the island. It had an amazing set of characters who were all Rita's friends. Tommy had this shy smile and had really pioneered the technique that they had of effectively using slogans on cardboard pieces and then going out panhandling in the traffic. Anything helps, even a smile, that kind of thing on the cardboard. And there was a trans woman named Michelle who was super sweet, often out of it, stayed stoned pretty much all the time. Little Bit was a little person who they all called the midget. She called herself Little Bit, and she turned tricks in cars and alleys. Guys would drive up from the peninsula to hire her for $50 for sex because they thought she was a kid. I mean, watching her turn tricks was just because we stayed around that scene enough. You see the life cycle, and a couple of people at least with only one leg. Actually, there are three that I can think of. The leg had either rotted off, or one of the woman named Vina, her boyfriend had shot it off. These people were in real distress and stuck, but they had each other. And Rita was staying there and considered herself doing okay. But by the time I met her, she had AIDS, hepatitis C, abscesses that were about to kill her, and then Tommy did have an abscess on his leg. It was so deep that the times I'd sleep out on the island, he'd wake up and he'd have to peel the tongue of his shoe out of his flesh, and it sounded like Velcro, like that. And then he'd be able to shoot up into the vein there, or the artery, with a big pulsing thing, and he'd shoot his needle into it. It smelled like rotten meat. And we'd tell him, Brant and I would say, you really ought to get that looked at. Well, he didn't. Turned into necrotizing fasciitis, and he essentially rotted to death. And Brant and I went and found his body. And Rita freaked out. It devastated her. And so I wrote all of this in that first day story of the Shame of the City series. And her sister Pam wound up reading it in Florida and got Rita's daughter Joy to come with her out to San Francisco. They found Rita. She was so wasted out that they didn't even recognize her when they first saw her. Said, Rita, we can take you home. You got another chance. She took it. And she went back home, and boy, did she revive. She became a beautifully restored woman. She became a health nutritionist, got a massage certificate, went to school for, and lived a healthy, terrific life, reconnected with all her kids. She actually had 5 total, reconnected with the rest of her family, and kept touch with me. I went back a year after her rescue because Pam wrote me and said, I'm coming out to get Rita. And I saw your story, and then she had a friend who called me and talked to me a little more about this. So I thought, okay, I'm going to wait to see if this sticks. So about a year later, I went back to Florida, and yeah, it stuck. She was doing really well. She believed in God, so she turned to her religion to help her, and Narcotics Anonymous. She did the right things, and I wrote this story, and then she had lost all her teeth from meth mouth, they call it, drugs and eating sweet stuff when you're, dope hungry. And a couple of dentists saw that story, got her teeth. So I wrote that story, and Gavin Newsom, who was mayor at the time, read these stories and said, it's a beautiful thing when family can come in and you can reconnect. So he created Homeward Bound, based on that reportage, which, I love that program. It helps reconnect people with their family. What you do is, if you're a street counselor, you ask a homeless person, do you want to go home? You got someone close to you who can give you a second chance, and if they say yes, you call the other end. You find out that this is actually something they want to do. So you get both sides willing to reunite, and you give them a bus ticket or an air flight home, and follow up a little bit after that, but you can't follow them up forever. And we did a study at the paper a few years ago showing that about half of those people stick. About half can tumble back to the street, maybe even come back to San Francisco. Half is pretty good. It's more than 10, nearly 15,000 people have taken that program over the years. So that's that many fewer people whose lives got changed, improved, restored, at least to some extent. Even if it only lasted a year or two, or if it stuck forever, who knows? I followed a couple of people home when that program started, and it was successful for the people I tracked.
And so Rita's, the second half, or perhaps the third act of her life, was quite decent. I mean, you write about the book about her death, was very sad, but it wasn't quite as tragic as Tyson.
Oh, nowhere near as tragic. She died of cancer. I mean, she was 73. Those were 20 years that she got back that she wouldn't have had. She would have been dead if her family hadn't rescued her, because the abscess was near her spine. AIDS was ravaging her body. She wouldn't have lasted. So she had 20 great years, and then got brain cancer, and that can happen to any of us.
Kevin, we're talking in March of 2025, of course. We have a new administration, a president who talks a lot about fentanyl, warning America's neighbors, Mexico and Canada, keeping fentanyl out. You note that Tyson died of a fentanyl overdose.
Yeah.
What do you make of the current administration's obsession with drugs and fentanyl and its hostility to neighbors in North America, in the context of your own experience and expertise in homelessness and overdoses?
Yeah, I don't want to get into politics and attacking Trump or the left or the right. What I can tell you is the reality of what I've seen is that fentanyl has exploded, yes, but I'll tell you, 20 years ago people were dying of heroin, and they were dying of too much cocaine, methamphetamine, drugs. I started out as a reporter when Reagan got elected, actually just a little before. So I watched this thing grow. Back then in the 80s, it was crack was the scourge of the world, going to bring down civilization. Then it was heroin again, and then it was meth, and then it was heroin again, and now it's fentanyl. They're all bad. I went over to Laos and Thailand for a series of stories just before I went on to Homeless Island, so in 2002. Went around with special forces teams on, clearing bombs left behind, and looked at a whole range of stories. And one of them I did was the methamphetamine surge, because Laos has, I believe it had the second or one of the biggest supplies of heroin poppies, and huge business coming all over the world, coming into America of heroin. And then they were learning how to cook, they call it yaba, methamphetamine. Huge amounts being shipped over in containers, little pills of meth. At the time it was pills. Now people smoke it or inject it. You can still find pill form. And then fentanyl. The trouble with fentanyl is that it takes so much less to get you high that the slightest miscalculation can kill you. So it kills quicker. And you have to smoke it more frequently than heroin, because it's the same kind of drug as heroin. It's more powerful than heroin, but it's a downer like heroin, an opioid. So whereas heroin you can snort it or inject it a couple times a day in a full cycle of a day, fentanyl you got to do every few hours, and you got to smoke it up. At any given time, the concentration of the fentanyl or the amount of the fentanyl, you're rolling the dice. Is it gonna kill you or not? And Narcan is this wonder drug that came around where you can revive someone when they're overdosing, and thousands of people every year get Narcan. They'd be dead if we didn't have that. That's how potent heroin and mostly fentanyl is. So that's the main difference. Is for me, I've written so many obits on people who died of heroin and meth over the years. Whether you're dying of fentanyl or heroin, it's all a tragic bottom end story. And there are a lot of housed people that do these drugs too. But when someone's in the street and they wind up dying on the sidewalk, I've seen them die in horrible ways. It's more visible, more publicly done, and it's awful. But they're all awful. None of them is a good way to die.
Kevin, finally, San Francisco has a new mayor. He claims to be starting again, doing things differently. He's from a wealthy family. You mentioned Gavin Newsom, former mayor of San Francisco, who was responsible for the Homeward Bound program. What advice would you give San Francisco's new mayor? You've noted that nobody wants to be homeless, so you'd be doing everyone a favor. No one in San Francisco wants homeless people on the street. So it seems everyone's in agreement. No one knows quite how to deal with this then.
That's the trouble. I've talked to every mayor since Gavin in the early 2000s. And I have found that they're all sincere about wanting to solve the problem. Not only from a compassionate point of view, but it's politically the thing to do, or to at least try, because it's often listed as the number one problem in San Francisco. So you better get your hands into it, or you'll be excoriated. So London Breed actually doubled the amount of shelter beds.
This was the previous mayor.
Yes, the previous mayor. Vastly increased the number of supportive housing over what it had been for several years prior. And she tried techniques. Dan Lurie, I've known Dan Lurie over the years, written about his programs. I believe he understands the mechanics of how to approach homelessness. The trick is coordinating everything so that it's the right recipe, which is really hard because this city does national model programs on how to do outreach, how to do supportive housing. We have one of the best supportive housing setups in the country, even though it has its problems. Old hotels, not enough case management, rats, and you can name problems in the program. But it also does a lot of good things too, and it houses a ton of homeless people, formerly homeless people, once they're inside. Dan knows this. He knows the importance of outreach. He studied it through Tipping Point, his foundation. They supported a lot of programs, built a lot of housing. I think he's bringing a fresh energy, which is always good to get fresh energy on this issue because it is a 40-year-old issue. It's for a lot of purposes. Like Jeff Kositsky, who used to be the homeless czar in San Francisco, used to say, it's not rocket science. We do know how to fix this. But the trouble that I see and that I articulate in the book is that we have a poverty problem in America. Matt Desmond is a friend of mine. He wrote a book called Poverty by America. I think he nails it. We have a poverty problem that wouldn't be that hard to fix. But as it is, about 30% of Americans are right at or below poverty line if you take into account the cost of living where they are. When you have that many people living hand to hand, hand to mouth, no more than $400 of savings, that's I believe the majority of Americans. How can you not have homelessness? You're trying to fix something in reverse. For every one person who becomes homeless in San Francisco, 4 more take their place. So you're bailing out this tide, and meanwhile the population is saying, how come you don't fix it today, tomorrow? What's wrong with you? The people who are trying to address this, everyone that I've known in that apparatus of the city and the nonprofits, they are sincere about wanting to address this. There's the idea that they're perpetuating this homelessness so they can keep jobs. I don't accept that. It's a huge problem, and it's bigger than one city. That's the issue. So I wish Dan Lurie a lot of luck. I know he's going to make some really good faith efforts, and God knows he may swing the needle. I hope so.
Well, I hope he gets to see this interview, the new mayor of San Francisco. Kevin Fagan, the author of The Lost and the Found, a true story of homelessness, found family, and second chances. Real honor, Kevin, to have you on the show. Thank you for this book. It's an incredible read. It's getting amazing press. And I think all San Franciscans, indeed all Americans, have a responsibility to read it. It's a wonderful read. It's deeply emotional, very accessible. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for appearing on Keen on America.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
He's an expert.